So Russ Baker, we've been trying to get him on the show for a long time. You do some work for him. And to give everyone a little background on Russ Baker, he is a U.S. investigative journalist and founder of the nonprofit website WhoWhatWhy.com. His recurring themes are politics, secrecy, and abuses of power. His recent writings have focused on the elites in finance, resource extraction, military intelligence operations, and their quiet influence over national and global political and economic affairs.
Plug all the things.
Yes, we're plugging things. Let's go ahead. It is about that time. And
so we're calling this guy after we start?
Let's talk to Russ.
We already started, Jeff. We already played the intro. We are doing this, okay?
What did you make, by the way, Jeff?
Yeah, what'd you drink?
Rum and Coke, as usual.
Oh, nice. Okay.
What are you drinking, Mike?
Water.
Oh, come on.
I don't have any alcohol here.
What?
I don't know. I don't know.
Doesn't make sense.
I drank it all.
Well, that does happen.
I can't be. You're not my father.
I know. Let's go ahead and add Russ to the call. Let's see if he'll pick up. My name's Mike, and we just read your intro, Russ. You have a pretty impressive resume, and you initially... Joe was talking about Family of Secrets, and your investigative work with George W. Bush, which is very interesting. And we wanted to have you on because we're coming up on the I guess you want to call it the anniversary of the Boston bombing, and you just put together an extremely detailed article about the so-called kidnapped Asian person in the Boston bombing, and kind of how that story fell apart.
Correct. In fact, today we have a news story up on our site, WhoWhatWhy.com, going further into the Boston bombing story and also the tremendous amount of apparent disinformation that is being put out by various elements of law enforcement and of the federal government.
It's just extraordinary. Like, when you go down this path, and does it kind of scare you in a way of some of the information you're uncovering?
Well, it does, until you remember that disinformation has always been the way of powerful institutions. And if we think back historically to whether it's the Vietnam War or the Spanish-American War, particularly wars, but also other things, large institutions, and obviously government being the largest of them all, have a default position of cover-up. That is, no institution, if you remember back to your days in high school, the principal was never going to admit the worst-case scenario. They were always going to say everything's under control. If they had to, they would admit to some very small thing and saying it was being corrected right away. We see the same thing individually with politicians like this family values guy who was just caught, married with 5 children, makes a big deal about family values, and he's caught making out with his young female staff aide, and then he immediately, fesses up to it and says it was a mistake, and he's already correcting his ways. So this is what all institutions do, and once you understand that, you can look at things like the Boston Marathon bombing and what we at WhoWhatWhy see as a cover-up. And you can see that it's not this sort of weird supernatural or tinfoil hat thing, but a very, very logical process.
So what did you learn with Kickstarter? You said you had a new story up today. What is this about?
The story today is a look at a new exclusive from the New York Times, which came out sort of yesterday or overnight, in which they quote an anonymous senior government official telling them that there's been this internal investigation of the Boston bombing and that the inspectors general concluded that the FBI had essentially done nothing wrong, had done its job in trying to do research and had no way of preventing the bombings. But actually, this official said that they sort of pointed the finger for the responsibility for them not catching these guys at the Russian government.
Of course.
Yeah, and it's kind of amazing. And of course, you say, well, wait a minute, Russia. Where did I hear about Russia recently? Who was it who was upset with Russia? Oh, it's the U.S. government.
Yeah.
And in a nutshell, because this thing can get quite complex, in a nutshell, what's going on with this whole Boston bombing story is that after the bombing, when the FBI was saying they had no idea who had done it, and then they focused on these two brothers, the Tsarnaev brothers, the Russians went public and said, hey, we warned you about these guys years ago. We told you need to investigate them because of their radical Islamic connections and their behavior. And so that story sort of vanished, and it just became that these were these two kids who were sort of lone wolves in committing this act. And the media and the government focused solely on that and ignored this kind of Russian backstory. And the FBI did admit that they had been notified by the Russians and they had looked into these two young men and had found nothing there, no reason, no cause for concern. And so this new exclusive through the New York Times is all about basically saying that, well, the Russians didn't tell us everything they knew, and that if they had, we would have taken more extreme measures. But this whole thing is a kind of a disinformation thing, because it distracts us from the likelihood that the FBI always knew exactly who these brothers were, and in fact had a much closer relationship to them than they care to admit. And this goes to the FBI's longstanding practice of coaxing apparent radicals to cooperate and to become FBI informants and FBI operatives.
So one of my questions I have, when you look back some of these big events like 9/11, where there was information there to potentially stop this, there's information for the Boston bombing to potentially stop this, and even the Oklahoma City bombing, there is enough information, and even the first World Trade Center. When does government incompetence turn into criminal neglect?
It's very hard to say because there are a lot of coincidences in life, and we can take any of us and find a million situations where we seemingly could have prevented something from happening and we didn't, and in fact it was not deliberate on our part. So we have to be very, very careful with this. And I personally, and in my work on my book Family of Secrets and with our website WhoWhatWhy, I always try to be very, very careful and essentially very agnostic about who did what and why until I can examine enough of the particulars. Now, I will say that as far as the Boston bombing goes, it's apparent to me and to our team that after extensive research that the government is deliberately covering up and distracting from what actually did happen. We don't know exactly what the relationship was with the Tsarnaevs. We do know, because the FBI has admitted, that they had direct contact with them several years prior to the bombing. That we know. And so the question is, how extensive was that contact, and when did it end, if it ended? We also know that they were very, very intent on quickly wrapping the case up and pinning the blame on these two brothers. We also know that they were very, very loose with their firearms in the presence of these two fellows. The elder brother shot and killed on the street. We are told that he was behaving in a very violent manner and lobbing bombs and so forth, but the eyewitness accounts of that are quite confused. The younger brother, we are told, escaped and then hid in a boat in someone's driveway, and that when the authorities found him and identified him as hiding in the boat, they then strafed the boat with more than 100 shots without him firing a single shot. So again, it was a tremendous amount of firepower aimed at him. A third person, a good friend of the elder brother, a fellow by the name of Todashev, interviewed by the FBI down in Orlando, Florida, multiple times. The final time, although he was unarmed, they say that he attacked them, and the FBI officer then shot him dead. And so what we have is 2 out of 3 significant people in this circle dead. The third very badly wounded in what appeared to be an attempt to try to kill him. And so if all of those people had been dead, there would have been nobody to tell us what exactly was the relationship of these brothers with the FBI.
Wow.
It's just really extraordinary that you can present this information to people and they're going to call you a lunatic, basically, for even digging into this kind of stuff. And I wonder if you've had any kind of pushback from presenting this information to people, to basically forcing them to think.
Yeah, sure. If you go to our website, WhoWhatWhy.com, and just scroll down the front page, you'll see a TV interview of me by a newswoman on a Boston television show. I know her and have worked with her in the past. She had the guts to have me on, but she felt obliged to begin by saying that there are a lot of sensitivities in Boston to this story, that a lot of people in her building there, in the public television station building, were very, very sensitive, and so that what I was about to say needed to be viewed with tremendous caution. Now, that's a kind of an interesting statement. Basically, I think what we're dealing with is that there's a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance in the United States, and particularly in elite circles in the media, in the legal profession, in the within the government and so forth, where people who have spent their lives working in the system simply cannot cope with the enormity of the inherent corruption of that system itself. And because we are so heavily propagandized from a very young age about American exceptionalism, about how vigorous our democracy is, how well our system works with checks and balances and so forth, it's very, very hard to square that with the sorts of truths that emerge from these sorts of major national traumas.
Yeah.
Now that you've kind of gone down this road, are there any? We're talking current events here. Are there any events in the past that you would like to go back and investigate if you had enough time to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I see the same, almost identical pattern of the FBI, the CIA, and other members of the vaunted national security establishment that needs all these tools to spy on us and everybody else screwing up. And I see these repeated examples of prior relationships between these agencies and the very perpetrators of the crimes that they end up investigating, pursuing, and in many cases terminating one way or another. And so many of these things, whether it's Iran-Contra or 9/11 or the first World Trade Center bombing or the Oklahoma City bombing, there are so many of these things that are strange and perplexing, and where any diligent journalist who fairly and open-mindedly digs into the empirical evidence finds that we are not being told a straight story. This is really, really troubling, and it's the kind of thing that makes any journalist who's willing to just go wherever the story goes kind of obsess on this stuff.
I have to ask this question because we dig into some weird stuff, lunatic stuff, just because I find it interesting. And one of the fringe topics that keep popping up on the show is black budgets used for possibly exotic technology from crashed UFOs. And is that a subject that you'd be willing to touch, because it is so contaminated with disinformation and basically lunatics?
Yeah, look, I mean, here's our position. We're professional, trained journalists, and even though in the age of the internet everybody calls themselves a journalist, being a trained journalist actually means something. It means you were steeped in a particular canon. You were taught about being fair, about trying to be objective, about not having a dog in the fight, about weighing conflicting evidence and statements. There is a particular craft to it. And basically what that means is that what you're supposed to do is be open to anything, but you also try to focus on what is doable and what is credible. And I think one of my concerns is that many of these major American and international traumas, which should be treated as sort of, let's say, police cases, crimes, are instead lumped in with all manner of exotica. And some people do this. I suppose they're well-intentioned, but I think some other people who do that are in fact part of the disinformation machine. In other words, it's much easier to discredit serious people like our team at WhoWhatWhy by sort of having a whispering campaign and equating us with people who make all sorts of assumptions about flying saucers and things, and we don't have any position on any of those things because we don't know anything about them. So, if somebody said to me, could there be other life in the universe, I'd say, yeah, of course. I mean, why not? Do I know that there is? I have no idea, and I'm not going to venture a guess about it because it's not something that I know anything about.
And another that how bad is that, by the way?
It's your bounce back's pretty bad. I think it's because you turned down your input volume.
Really?
Yeah.
Does that sound better?
Yes.
Yes, there's no bounce.
Oh, weird. Okay, well, I wonder if you think about it too as sort of the public good. I mean, are you avoiding looking into things that may prove fruitful, but they may not pay off for the public at large?
Well, no, but I mean, I think you take anybody. If you're not a focused individual, you're not an effective individual. And WhoWhatWhy is a small nonprofit with a tiny staff and a small budget based entirely on donations from the public, most of whom don't give anything, but all of whom have an opinion on what we ought to cover. And we just can't do it all. So we choose a few things that we think are important and relevant and part of the public conversation, and that's what we focus on.
I should say it up front that this podcast does not accept donations. There are people that listen that want to donate. Don't give it to us. Go to Russ's website and give to him. And we'll definitely post that on the show notes. I just refuse to take donations just because I'm too lazy. But you can go to WhoWhatWhy.com, donate to Russ. He is a true journalist, where what I do is I just talk about goofy stuff and try to make people laugh. But these topics are interesting. I'm just stupid, and I can't talk about them in an articulate way.
What?
Hey, look, I'm
George. Come on now.
I'm an honest guy.
No.
All right, I'm going to loosen my tie after that statement.
Yeah. Did you drink, by the way, Russ?
I forgot to have a drink, but after this show, I definitely need a strong one.
Sure.
Yeah. Usually, I mean, if you want to take some time and grab one now, we often fix drinks and use the restroom on this show. That is a common theme of the show.
I have a little-known humorous side.
Little known?
You come off very serious, and you do a great job of it. But the jokes that you do during your talks, which I would recommend anyone just check out the WhoWhatWhy YouTube page as well and watch. Russ has talks up, and he goes through all this stuff, and he takes questions from people, and, I mean, all of this stuff is available, and it's amazing the amount of knowledge you have. I was talking to Mike and Clown Baby about the way that you found your way through Family of Secrets. I found that fascinating. Do you mind talking a little bit about how that became sort of a rabbit hole for you?
Not at all. I sort of stumbled into that book project a little bit by accident, and then I stumbled into the things that I found that sort of changed my life and my understanding of how things work. again, sort of by accident, but again, also, I suppose, by plan, because when you set out to investigate things, you know you're going to find things you weren't expecting. Basically, I had been living abroad for a while, training journalists in another country on investigative reporting techniques. And during that period, we heard the drums beating for war in Iraq. I wrote about that from abroad. I kind of couldn't believe what was happening because it seemed very clear that they were cooking the books on this thing. Sure, and sure enough, there we had the war. I then returned to the United States, was intrigued by the fact that it was clear that the Bush administration had deceived us, and yet there he was running for re-election and seemingly doing pretty well. And that sort of fascinated me. And I thought, I really ought to cover this campaign, but not do it in the usual horse race way, but to try to figure out what were the deeper forces that were allowing a man who had done what he did to come back into office again. So I began looking at him and looking at his battles with the Democrats and then with John Kerry over his military record and Kerry's military record and so on. And I just became more and more interested in Bush because I found there were so many secrets to him and to his family, and hence the book title, eventually, Family of Secrets. As I was looking into him, trying to figure out really how it was that a guy as unexceptional as him could rise to the most powerful position in the world, and I began realizing that to understand his rise, you had to first look at his father and his father's not fully examined rise to power. And it was in that constellation of the father and the son and even the grandfather that I began to see whole new strands explaining kind of power and flows within America and within its history that I had never previously understood.
Would you say that was your wake-up moment?
I think it was a major wake-up moment, although as I go back and I look at my journalistic history, I see that even in 1990 or so, in the early days of my journalistic career, I was already doing big pieces about the intelligence apparatus and propaganda and deception and the power mechanisms of the banks and the oil companies and their alliances with people inside government. So I was already kind of looking at those things a long time ago, but I think that I was operating in a more kind of conventional framework for explaining these things that within the, let's say, the reformist camp, the kind of general notion that basically America is okay. We have some problems, some structural problems, but that these things are all fixable within conventional institutions. And so it really was way down the road, literally, what was it, 15 or 20 years later, with my work during the 2004 campaign, and then the following year, as I began working on the book that became Family of Secrets, that I began to understand how very little I knew about how things really work in this country.
That is just totally fascinating to me, because I think it ties back to what we were saying a little bit earlier about how massive the cognitive dissonance is in the American public. It's because when you start to look into these things and you begin to understand, like, holy cow, this kind of ties to this kind of ties to that, and this whole thing is so just massive. This is where the cognitive dissonance comes from, right? This is the divide in what is actually happening versus what we believe is happening.
Yeah, we kind of create these little kind of imaginary, I guess you call them like video games that kind of keep us sane. So, Sarah Palin, the Koch brothers, Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, these are the evil cartoon characters, and if we only can stop them, then everything will be okay. And this is the good guy, and this is the bad person.
Yeah. Like Russia right now.
It's all very kind of manageable, and if only this person were on the Supreme Court instead of that person. And it's sort of averting our eyes from a much larger, much more horrific vision of the capacity of humanity for evil, really.
Yeah. What kind of? Go ahead, Mike.
Basically a philosophical question. I probably already know the answer to this, but maybe for some of our listeners, should America be concerned that we are going from Bush to Clinton to Bush and then an Obama presidency with a heavy Clinton influence in the State Department back to possibly a Clinton again? These two families they're friends. All these ex-presidents are friends and hang out. It seems like we have one machine and the figurehead just goes back and forth between two different families. It's kind of insane.
Yeah, and then, you see with all these families also, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, supposedly liberal or supposedly conservative, that they really attend a handful of academic institutions. They have very similar experiences. They are supported on their way up by particular sort of banking elements and think tanks and what have you. And then you also see a strand where almost all of these people have some kind of either definitive or at least seeming connections to the intelligence apparatuses, and that is for the candidates of both parties. And then, as you point out, we have this sort of dynastic thing, and it's even worse than that. I mean, you have the Bushes saying that Bill Clinton is like a son to George H.W. Bush, and then you have George H.W. Bush and Jeb visiting Obama in the White House for private meetings about some subject for which we may not be briefed. It's all very peculiar, and it's not the kind of thing that you want to see. It's kind of interesting. I just came back from England, and if you observe their parliament, it's a much more sort of vigorous debate, a much more kind of no-holds-barred, and the coziness between all of these supposedly opposing elements in our country is at least perplexing and frankly frightening.
Yeah, because they kind of swear right over in UK. They're like they'll call each other names and everything. There's no sort of etiquette really in that body that I've seen.
Yeah, it's a whole different phenomenon, and it's fascinating also because if you in the House of Commons, I mean, there's the Prime Minister, and he's just right there having to defend himself. He's got no flack, he's just being pilloried, and he's got to respond immediately. It's fascinating to watch, and our President Obama has been less accessible to the media than almost any predecessor, which is quite remarkable because he talked about opening up the government. So it's interesting to look at other countries. Obviously, in some ways, we've got things better. We do basically have better laws. We have a Constitution and a First Amendment that they don't have. So on some things, we're better. But some of these other things, we definitely have a much more imperial presidency than frankly their system with the royal family. So we're not quite as rustic and pure democracy as we'd like to believe we are.
I have to ask some sexy questions here. Because there was accusations that the Jeff Gannon in the White House press corps, and he was a male escort. You had Obama being accused of being a down low brother, to put it one way, and then you had Clinton with a string of sexual escapades, accusations.
Kid sex on that island recently came out.
So is there anything to the Jeff Gannon thing with Bush or even Obama? I mean, they shut that down quick.
Well, I don't know. Certainly the mere facts and the undisputed facts, most of them never commented upon by the White House, that Gannon was in and out of that place, that he should have ever been there in the first place since he wasn't a real journalist, the access that he was given, the fact that they frequently called on him to ask questions, apparent after hours access to the White House. It's all very, very strange. And again, I mean, if the media was serious about doing its job, it would look into all of these things, whether it was about the Bush White House and Karl Rove and whatever his relationship may or may not have been to Jeff Gannon, but also to take a harder look at what kind of a person Bill Clinton really was, because it wasn't just a Lewinsky thing. The Lewinsky thing, I think you could argue, was way overblown and allowed to kind of take over everything else. But the non-consensual elements of his life and the myriad accusations that he forced himself in particularly brutal ways upon women, I mean, these are important measures, at least of character, and perhaps cause for concern that these people would be subject to some form of blackmail.
Isn't that what the NSA is basically about? I mean, it's blackmail anytime you want it.
I mean, certainly the Snowden revelations point in that direction, that there were statements made that these concerns were there, that people who worked in these institutions were aware that they were in a position to know too much about people, to do something about it if they wanted. I think these are always concerned. I think it's naive to believe that. I mean, we all know that when J. Edgar Hoover ruled America, and by the way, we have a new piece about his FBI on our website, WhoWhatWhy, this week. But I think we're naive to believe that it was only J. Edgar Hoover who was blackmailing anybody and everybody, and that stopped. Why would it stop? I mean, that kind of information is valuable. And I remember meeting with one very powerful member of Congress who asked me what I thought was the largest or most powerful industry in Washington. I thought for a second, and I said, I guess lobbying. And he said, maybe, but I'd venture that it's sexual blackmail.
Mm. And he's probably baiting them, too, by getting other people, handlers, people who work for the FBI, because this is a game they're playing where they sort of can get people to do things, as we saw with the 93 World Trade Center and that sort of thing. He's probably making it very easy for these people who he wants to blackmail. It's easy for them to find some sort of, because sex is something that's one of these primal urges. You go ahead and pay somebody a bit of money to go find whoever you want to blackmail. I mean, do you think the government would be above any of that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it has to do specifically with government. I think that all institutions and powerful people use these sorts of things as leverage. Many of us like to watch House of Cards because it's sort of the ultimate expression of this. But it's just a reality. When you're in a situation and you need a critical advantage, you look for what you can get. And one of the problems in this country is that we are such hypocrites about human behavior and human needs. Most other countries look at us and sort of laugh at our prudery and our insistence on impossible standards of behavior by our elected officials. I mean, the reality is that high-powered people in stressful situations that sex is not as unrelated as an outlet, whether people are athletes or debaters or whatever they are, sex, just like exercise, is an outlet and a healthy one at that. And so everybody believes that these people should have perfect marriages, or I guess I don't know what they think if they're single. If you're single, there's supposed to be something wrong with you, so there's pressure to get married or to create a false marriage or something. Or if somebody is gay, there's always been the pressure to pretend they were straight and to find an acceptable
like Lindsey Graham,
a beard, and so all of these things have just never been we've never come to terms with these things. If we could only say, listen, as long as you're not forcing yourself on people, you can do whatever you want in the sexual, and it's not with a child or perhaps an animal. You can do
all these rules. It's like, and they got to be alive too. Jesus, where did these?
I know. I mean, I guess let them do necrophilia. I mean, if the animal thinks it's okay, let's let them do that. God, they probably would be a lot more emotionally well balanced if they had some outlets.
Absolutely.
That's a good way to look at it.
We have to wind this down because we got to move on.
I want to ask another question. I have one I think that is pretty important because we had an incident last time I was on the show where we had Jeff on the show and we have these people in our lives all the time. People who look into this stuff, who share articles to Who, What, Why. Or I sent my dad the book Family of Secrets because he's a big Bush fan, and I was like, please read this book and stop, just stop, They're just so closed-minded. They won't even entertain the idea, and they criticize it. I know it's connected to the cognitive dissonance, but what do you think? I mean, what do we do about that? Like, how do we break that barrier?
I have this conversation all the time. I just came from meeting with somebody with whom I have this discussion frequently. I'm thinking about it all the time. I don't have an easy answer for it. I think, and I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that there's a percentage of the public who will never get it. I think there's a percentage of the public who will get it quickly, and then there is everybody else. And everybody else, I think, is open in certain moments, and we've got to look for those moments, and when they're there, we've got to make our best case.
That's well put.
Absolutely. Russ, thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Great to talk to you.
And hopefully you can come back sometime once another disaster happens. You can tell us all what happens.
Okay, I'm sure there'll be one of those.
Yeah, I'll be right around the corner, actually. I think there'll probably be a disaster out there in Nevada with the ranchers, so we'll figure out what happens after that.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Russ. Appreciate it.
Do we blow him up?
There you go.
Star Trek door?
Star Trek door? Blow him up? Star Trek door and blow him up?
Who cares?
I got it right here. I got Star Trek doors.
How much editing are you going to have to do?
Not much. It was all pretty good.
If you're playing sound clips, I can't hear them.
Oh, you're right. I actually turned down the sound clips just in case there's any bounce back on that end.
There we go.